We'll jump into Matthew 14 to 16 now. So, any questions on the Psalms before we jump over to Matthew? No questions. Okay. Cool. All right. John the Baptist beheaded. Well, this is going from vengeance is God's to giving it back. Okay. What? Oh, I like that section. The faith of the Canaanites. Oh, the 4,000. I'll have something to say when we get there. Okay. That looks like a good reading for today. Well, for yesterday. So, John the Baptist beheaded. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch had... Let me take a drink and start over. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He has risen from the dead. That is why miraculous powers are at work in him." Guilty conscience much? Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It is not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guest and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Promised by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oath and his dinner guest, he ordered that her request be granted, and had John beheaded in prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. This is a horrific story. It is compounded by the situation that we sometimes go past. Herod takes his brother Philip's wife. Philip is supposed to be king. Philip is now on the outs, and Herod's going to be king. So Herodias jumps from one brother to the other because she wants to be married to the king. And now that Philip's not going to be king, well, he's not good enough for her. So she runs over to Herod. And Herod's like, cool with this? What is wrong with him? Yeah, lots there. And so John confronts him about the situation. Herod wants to do something about it, but knows it's not a good choice to do something about it. He'd like to silence John, but doesn't. Well, Herodias takes this personally too, because she's tired of hearing it. So when an opportunity arises to do something about it, she doesn't hesitate. She instructs her daughter to do what Herod doesn't have the guts to do. So don't feel like Herod's just bound by this oath that he made and he couldn't do anything by it. He could have refused. He could have said, "I'm sorry, honey. I set up to half the kingdom. I didn't say you could execute anybody. I have no just cause to execute him." And he could have got out of it. He didn't have to. He could have persuaded her to do something else. He could have offered her 3/4 of the kingdom instead of John. He had options to get out. He didn't want to get out. He was able to pass the blame off and say, "Hey, I didn't ask for it. Herodias, her daughter did." Now, it's interesting, it says the daughter of Herodias, and I think there's a thing here so that we know it's not Herod's own daughter. That would be incredibly gross. Now it says danced, and we don't know exactly, but her dancing pleased him. What kind of dancing? Well, I think we could imply things here. I don't care if that's what is or isn't. It doesn't matter. But it's a horrid story is what it is. And you can see how it tormented, because we get the foreshadowing of this is John the Baptist. That's who he thinks Jesus is raised from the dead. Well, that's why he has miraculous power. We see the foreshadowing of this whole section before we even see the death of John. So that Jesus doing miracles is foreshadowed here in the mind of Herod about John and the guilt he has over doing. At least I think that. And now we're going to get to those miraculous things that he does. When Jesus had heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. I love that this is what continuously happens. He had compassion on them. Jesus' purpose isn't to go around healing people. That's not his purpose, but he has such compassion that he does it anyway. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples are trying to send them away because they have nothing to give them. Jesus, you didn't pick up on their clue. They're like, this is going to turn into a disaster. We can't help them. They didn't bring anything. We need to get away before mob mentality takes over and hunger. They're all going to be hangry here soon. We have no Snickers bars. They don't need to go anywhere. You give them something to food. "We have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. See, they've already looked in this version of the story. They've already looked. That's why they want to send them away, because they know they don't have enough. 5 loaves and 2 fish. "Bring them here to me," he said. And he directed the people to sit on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. I like this here. Sometimes we think that prayer has only one posture. It says looking up to heaven here, not bowing his head to pray. He looks up to heaven. He gives thanks when he breaks the loaves, and he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those that ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So we often call this the feeding of the 5,000. Well, besides the women and children, it might be more accurate to say the feeding of the 10,000 or the 12,000. Feeding of the multitude is certainly a good title. Okay. So, continuing, immediately, I love how that's because immediately is just the next event. It doesn't automatically, we need to assume the action happens, within mere moments of everyone being fed. However, it's the narrative tool to move us to the next part of the story. This reminds you of the story of the church in Acts. The people who had something give to the church. The church gives to all. All are fed and then some. Yeah, good connection there. Yeah, definitely. This would be a good model to follow, and the early church does. So, immediately Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowd. So in this case, it does seem that it is immediately, but I just wanted to point out that immediately doesn't always mean that. It's a literary device. So, after he had dismissed them, he went up on the mountainside by himself to pray. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves, because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid." "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. I'm going to just pause there. This is such a familiar story to many of us that we don't stop to think about what's happening in the story. So here we have fishermen on a lake, what's being buffeted, and they see someone walking on the water. I understand the terror and the fear and thinking it's a ghost. I don't know what else you would think it is. Someone walking on the water. It certainly couldn't be a person. People can't walk on water. I don't know. I'd jump to ghost, but I certainly wouldn't know what it was. But ghost makes sense in this circumstance. We kind of poo-poo it and laugh at them. But Jesus says to them, take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid. Why would Peter say and think, well, if it's you, Jesus, tell me to come walk on the water? If it's a ghost and the ghost has the ability to talk, couldn't the ghost just tell him? I mean, I'm just confused, Peter, how you think that the ghost who can talk to you couldn't tell you what you want to hear, even if it's a ghost and not Jesus. Yeah, I mean, do you follow the problem here? We like the story. I like the story. I like Peter's boldness in this circumstance. Oh, if it's you, Jesus, tell me to walk on water. It sounds so noble. It sounds so intellectual. If it's a ghost that can talk to him and said it's I, and it's trying to deceive him, wouldn't it then reply with what Peter wants it to reply with? I'm just following through there. Peter had faith. He already had faith. It was Jesus. That's a good point, probably. And maybe Peter just wanted to try walking on water, and this was an excuse. I'm just, if we stop and pause, that's what I want to do, because I don't want us to always just read it and assume it and answer it and go, yeah, that's makes sense, and I've heard that. Oh yeah, so Jesus walking on water, so Peter walks on water. Yeah, that sounds good. Logically, this doesn't follow that would be the thing you would ask of something you think is a ghost, to say, hey, tell me to walk on water. Because if you can't, and it's an impossible thing to do, then wouldn't a ghost want you to die and tell you to walk on water? So inquiring of it to ask me to walk on water would actually be a bad idea. So, okay. Yeah, what did he want to? Yeah. Oh, I meant he wanted to walk on water. Maybe he thought it was a cool thing. Maybe that's why he asked it to Jesus. He wanted to have permission to try it too. It was what I was getting at. That would be one line of thinking. But regardless of that, I'm just pointing out the logic fallacy in thinking that a ghost would not tell you to do something that might be something you couldn't actually do. Yeah, Peter, walk on water. Go for it. Peter steps out of the boat because it is a ghost, and he drowns. Here's another thing that we don't always think about. Just because they're fishermen doesn't mean they know how to swim. People didn't learn how to swim. People avoided the water. Swimming was not recreational. If you knew how to swim, it was probably because you figured out the hard way by surviving a shipwreck. That's what more likely how you learned to swim, is surviving when your ship went down and you were close enough to shore, you could make it out. So, all right, enough of my sidetrack here, but I did that in some ways because I want us to at times not just accept passages we're familiar with, but actually meditate on them, think about them, wrestle with what's happening. So this seems like a good one to do that. Okay. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, crying out, Lord, save me. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hands and caught him. You of little faith, he said, why did you doubt? Why did he doubt? He said, Jesus, tell me to. And then he was. The guys in the boats are the ones that doubted. They had no faith. Okay, I guess there's the distinction. He had little faith. The mustard seed. It got him out of the boat. And then, yeah, we often talk about this. Oh, see, we ask God for enough strength to start, and then we look at our circumstance and we fail like Peter. I don't want to go there. Let's go keep reading now. And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." See, if Peter really thought it was Jesus, why didn't he say, "Hey, Jesus, calm the lake. Just calm the storm, Jesus"? You could do that. Just calm the storm. If it's you, Jesus, he could have asked him for, "Hey, how many fish did we catch last week?" He could have asked for other information. Instead, he asked for an action. He takes action, and we all go, "Oh, well, Peter sank." Yeah, and he got out of the boat. He got out of the boat. So, I do want to point out this, though. Those who will say Jesus never proclaims or never believes that he is God, then those who were in the boat worshiped him. There's the claim right there that Jesus is God. Jews are not worshiping anyone but God. He is a good Jew. He is a good rabbi. If he is not to be worshiped, he is taking this opportunity to tell them to stop. Notice what angels do. They say, "Stop, do not worship me." What do Paul and Barnabas do? What do Peter and John do? I think it's Peter and John. They say, "Stop, do not worship us. We serve God, worship God only." Whenever people stop and see awesome things, and they try to worship the disciples, they try to worship angels, there's always a correction and an immediate "do not do this." And here, they worship Jesus, and they say, "Truly you are the Son of God." And so, yeah, there's no correction here. If Jesus doesn't claim to be, he would stop right here and say, "Stop doing that. I am not God." So, if it is you, Jesus, calm the storm makes more sense. Maybe calm it and then let me walk on the water. Yeah, there you go. Exactly. I just want to say, sometimes I wanted to point out that we accept stories because we're familiar with them. We don't think about how improbable the logic in them is. And I don't mean that from the standpoint of they're false. I mean that from the standpoint of these can only be true because nobody would sit down and write stories that would have these unless that's what really happened. That's part of my point too. And I also want us to think about and meditate on what we're hearing and seeing and not just overlook things because we're familiar. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret, and when the men of that place recognized Jesus, they sent word to all the surrounding country. People brought all their sick and begged him to let the sick just touch the edge of his cloak, and all who touched it were healed. We've had a couple other instances, but I just find this fascinating. This faith that even the clothing that the person has can heal. If we're in the New Testament further in the book of Acts, I believe people wanted even Peter's shadow to touch them, and the shadow could heal. I just find that level of faith in healing just amazing. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law came to Jesus from Jerusalem and asked, "Why do your disciples break the traditions of the elders? They don't wash their hands before they eat." Okay, this is not telling your kids, "Go wash your hands," because there's dirt on germs on them and you don't want to eat the dirt and the germs. That's not what this is. This is ceremonial cleaning. It's symbolic. It's not to clean your hands. It's to be cleansed spiritually and to be in purity before you eat. And so that's the accusation, is they're not following this tradition of ceremonial cleaning. Jesus replied, "And why do you break the commands of God for the sake of your traditions? For God says, 'Honor your father and mother,' and anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. But you say that if anyone declares that what might be used to help their father and mother is devoted to God," that would be the name Corban there, "they are not to honor their father and mother with it. Thus you nullify the word of God for the sake of your tradition. You hypocrites! Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. So if you're not familiar with that, devoted to God would be like saying, for instance, and we need to think more in an agricultural sense. I've harvested all of my grain from my field. Let's say I've got 100 bushels of wheat in my barn, and my parents are struggling and they need food, and I'm not able to help them because, well, those 100 are all supposed to be given to be my temple worship, my sacrifices. Those are all supposed to be my grain offering. I can't give it to you. Or I'm going to sell that and the money is going to go to the church. I can't give it to you. This is almost the opposite of the Ananias and Sapphira thing of claim. Well, maybe it's more connected than that. Maybe it's not the opposite. It's like all of that, the proceeds of that land are going to go to the church. I can't sell that land and help you, Mom and Dad. I've got to give it to the church. And so that's what they're doing. They're getting out of the command to honor your father and mother by saying, I'm going to honor the church and the giving and the tithing. And he's like, you're not doing that and honoring me, and you're not honoring them. You're just trying to find a loophole to get out of what you should do. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen and understand, what goes into someone's mouth does not defile them, but what comes out of the mouth, that is what defiles them. Then the disciples came to him and asked, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this? Duh, that was the point. He replied, every plant that my heavenly Father has not planted will be pulled up by its roots. Leave them. They are blind guides. If the blind lead the blind, both will fall into a pit. Peter said, explain the parable to us. Are you still so dull? Jesus said to them, don't you see that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and then out of the body? But the things that come out of a person's mouth come from the heart, and these defile them. For out of the heart comes evil thoughts, murder, adultery, sexual immorality, theft, false testimony, slander. These are what defile the person. But eating with unwashed hands does not defile them. So we have an accusation that's based on tradition and trying to be better and superior to someone else. That's what they're trying to do. And Jesus sees right through it. Also, there's the thought of becoming impure by what you put in your body. So if you were to eat something that's impure, you have become impure. And Jesus is like, no. If something goes into your body, it comes out your body the other end. Doesn't stay in there. It can't make you impure from that kind of thinking. Actually, what makes you impure is what comes out of your mouth, not what you put in. So food doesn't make you impure. Words that you say, actions that you do, those are what makes you impure. And he's saying that following the Pharisees and the religious leaders who don't know where they're going and don't know what they're doing, and their heart isn't set on God, you're not going to find God by following them. They are lost. They are blind. You're both going to end up falling into a pit. And the disciples go, yeah, I don't know what you're talking about, Jesus. I don't get that. What do you mean it goes in the mouth and it doesn't? It comes out of the mouth and it does defile. How does, what? What? So Jesus has to explain that. I love at times when they do this. I don't blame. And then Peter's usually the spokesperson because he's the most bold in the sense of he'll ask, he'll say it, he'll put it out there. I don't know that every time it says Peter said, it actually was. I think, it's kind of like the memory of things that if there's the one person in your family that's always the one who's going to speak up and say something, but they only really actually do it 75% of the time, your memory is going to fill them in as the one who actually said it when you're trying to recall things later on. So either way, Jesus explains it because they don't understand it. Leaving that place, so we're continuing, leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So if you remember, we just had the curses, well, the woe, the prediction of calamity against Tyre and Sidon when we were reading Isaiah. So here we have that region of Tyre and Sidon. Remember, there was also the it will be restored. It's still around. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon possessed and suffering trouble. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying out after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Yes, it is, Lord, she said. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. Then Jesus said to her, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted, and her daughter was healed at that moment. This is one of those passages that I don't think on the surface it appears to be what it reads on the surface. Disciples are telling Jesus to send her away. He doesn't send her away. She keeps crying out. He's in a region of Tyre and Sidon. They're not supposed to be following Jesus. They're not supposed to be coming after. But here's a person who is from the Gentile region who recognizes who he is. Now, Jesus has gone out to different regions before. Why this time does he intentionally say, and he says the dogs, because he's referring to Gentiles. The Gentiles are referred to as the dogs. They're worthless. They're not worth anything. They're out there. Not like we think of dogs as man's best friend. They're worthless. So I think, and I've heard others describe it this way, of he's kind of giving her the nudge, the wink. Hey, I'm telling you this, but I'm not really telling you this kind of thing. I don't know if he did something like that or not, but I do believe he intends to continue this conversation, and he doesn't say anything to end the conversation. Look at what he says. I was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. The woman came and knelt. Lord, help me. It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. She said, yes, it is, Lord. Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. See, there's an engagement here. There's not a send her away. The disciples urge him to send her away. She keeps crying out after us. He doesn't send her away. He says things to allow her to engage in conversation. He says things that the disciples are believing so that he can present an opportunity to counter their thinking. They're the ones who initiate the send her away. He has no intention to send her away. He wants them to understand the level of her faith that he already knows, and he wants her to demonstrate her great faith. So what does he do? He engages her in a conversation that she has to defend her desire to come to God and to find healing. And he says, you have great faith. Your request is granted. He is looking for that opportunity to do that. In other places, it just says he has great compassion and he heals them all, and there is no conversation that's meaningful. There's a point here. He went to a region where there should not have been healing. Remember, there's the accusation. Where was it at? If the miracles performed here would have been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented in sackcloth and ashes. So now he goes to Tyre and Sidon so that there is a person there who can demonstrate that there is great faith within Tyre and Sidon that his hometown didn't have. Okay. This is also a great thing we don't often pay attention to. Look here. It says, Jesus feeds the 4,000. Well, I thought it was 5,000. Yeah, that's back up here where we read earlier. Jesus feeds the 5,000. That's in Matthew 14. Now we're going to look at Jesus feeds the 4,000. This is in Matthew 15, separated by some miracles in between. So, what's different about this? Why does he do it twice? Do we know that there are two of them? Or do we just think, oh, I just thought they said it wrong and it was 4,000 instead of 5. Somebody got the count wrong. No, it's a different occasion. Jesus left there and went along the Sea of Galilee. Then he went up on a mountainside and sat down. Great crowds came to him, bringing the lame, the blind, the crippled, the mute, and many others, and laid them at his feet, and he healed them. The people were amazed when they saw the mute speak, the crippled made well, the lame walk, and the blind see, and they praised the God of Israel. I think that's important. This is their response to seeing it. They're not there for the show. They're praising God because of what they saw. The other thing what's interesting here is when John sent his disciples, how did Jesus reply? The lame walk, the blind see. That's how that he described that he was the Messiah, and here he is doing those things. So, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They've already been here with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. He's been healing people for 3 days? I do not want to send them away hungry, or they may collapse on the way. His disciples answered, Where could we buy enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied, and a few small fish. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Then he took the 7 loaves and the fish, and when he had given thanks, he broke them and gave them to the disciples, and they in turn to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. Afterwards, the disciples picked up 7 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was 4,000 men, besides women and children. After Jesus had sent the crowd away, he got in a boat and went to the vicinity of Magadan. So notice the story's different. It's not 5 loaves and 2 fish. It's 7 and a few fish. This time, the disciples aren't saying, let's send them away. They're trying to solve the problem. Where could we get enough bread in this remote place to feed such a crowd? Instead, this time when Jesus says, I have compassion on them, let's feed them. They're not going, well, okay, we're going to get out of this and be able to send them away. That didn't work last time. It won't work this time. Let's use logic and say we couldn't go buy enough food for it. Well, how much do you have? Well, again, look, they're already prepared. They've already done the counting. They've already figured out what's available. 7 loaves, a few small fish, and he gives thanks. So the give thanks is the same. There's no looking to heaven in this one. Doesn't mean he didn't. It's just not emphasized. And then when they eat and have their fill, it's not 12 baskets. It's 7 baskets. So that's how we know it's 2 different occasions. There are differences in the story. Why does he do it twice? I'm not going to answer that. Why does he do it twice? Well, let's look at what happens in the Old Testament when the people are wandering in the desert for 40 years. There's manna that comes from heaven. They complain and they get quail. But it's 40 years of God providing for them. So maybe there's something connected with the wandering in the desert and the providing manna from heaven. Perhaps there's something more there. Is there something symbolic in the 7 here, completeness of the story? Something in the 12 earlier, representation of the 12 tribes? We can read into some of the things that are listed here. Why 5,000? Why 4,000? That's how many were there. Different occasion, smaller crowd, different location, different reason for it. Here they're there 3 days. I can't imagine sitting and watching for 3 days. It doesn't mean necessarily that they didn't go in between. Maybe they camped out there the whole time and watched the whole time, or it took that long to do it. Spend time asking more questions of the text, even if you don't have answers to them. That's still a meaningful thing to do. It also could be foreshadowing. We have the Pharisees demanding a sign. He just gave the people a sign. He fed people the same way that God fed people in the Old Testament. Moses and the manna. So, let's keep going. The Pharisees and Sadducees came to him and tested him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He replied, when evening comes, you say, it'll be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, today it will be stormy, for the sky is red and overcast. Maybe you've heard phrases about that red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in morning, sailors take warning. So certainly a connection here. They may not have known or said it that way, because I think that only kind of rhymes in English, but certainly that's common ancient knowledge. You know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you cannot interpret the signs of the times. A wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of Jonah. Jesus then left them and went away. So they're asking for a sign. Red sky at night, shepherd's hut, a light. I don't know that one. Maybe that's a sheep herder thing. I don't know. I'm not familiar with that one. I just know the sailors one. If you know more on that, Cookies and Psalms, just type that, because I'd be interested. But they're looking for a sign. Jesus has just done sign after sign after sign, and it's not enough for them. So he knows nothing will be enough. It's to do with sheep rustling. Okay, that makes sense. So he calls them a wicked and adulterous generation, looks for a sign, but none will be given except the sign of Jonah. They don't know what the sign of Jonah is. We know what the sign of Jonah is, that Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, and then he came out and he was alive, life from death. Jesus will be 3 days and 3 nights in the ground, and then life will come from death. So yeah, exactly. That's the point. The red sky in morning, take warning. Could be stormy that day. If it's a red sky in the morning, red sky at night, it's going to be calm and clear. So so they're looking for it. Here's another point, though. I think we overlook a wicked and adulterous generation looks for a sign. While we might be looking for the return of Jesus, looking for a sign to tell us that the end is near, we're not looking for Jesus to do what he wants to do. We're looking for him to do what we want him to do. I don't know, Ukulele, if there are sheep in Florida, but I do know that one of the largest horse farms, I believe, is in Florida. So, yeah. So in Florida, there might not be sheep, but there's a lot of ocean, that's for sure. All right, so we have this occasion, and Jesus says, I'll tell you what sign I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you the sign of resurrection. And he left them and went away. And they're like, what? You didn't do anything. We didn't see anything. Yeah, it's all to come. All to come. All right, so when they went across the lake, they're crossing the lake a lot. You notice this? It's ping, ping, ping. They're crossing the lake. The disciples forgot to take bread. Be careful, he said to them. Be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They discussed this among themselves and said, it is because we didn't bring any bread. No, it's not. Oh, they missed it. Aware that their discussion, he said, "Oh, you of little faith, why are you talking among yourselves about having no bread? Do you still not understand? Don't you remember the 5 loaves and for the 5,000, and how many basketfuls you gathered, or the 7 loaves for the 4,000, and how many basketfuls you gathered? How is it you don't understand that I was not talking to you about bread? But be on your guard against the yeast of the Pharisees and Sadducees." Then they understood that he was not telling them to be on their guard against the yeast used in bread, but against the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Again, the disciples miss it. Here's the wonderful thing that Jesus does. He uses common, ordinary things to represent spiritual things in nature. And at times it's really easy to miss. But he also said the reason he talks and teaches in parables is so that it'll be hidden from the wise and revealed to the lowly. So here, the yeast of the Pharisees, the disciples aren't getting it because they're not understanding that. And if you do this, if there's yeast in the bread, it's in all the bread. There's not I only put yeast in half the bread. No, the yeast fills the whole bread. It's why whenever you were going to have Passover, you needed to go through the house and clean the house to make sure there was no yeast whatsoever in the bread. And we need to think more in the lines of sourdough bread kind of idea, where you just leave it out and you keep feeding it and it keeps growing, kind of a thing. You would have a portion of things that would contain the yeast, and you could then put it into the new one to get it started, so it was more like a yeast starter kind of thing. Not to pull out your Fleshmans and scoop some out of your jar, or get a little packet, shake it, and put it in. They collected it by it being in natural growing circumstances in their house. So they had to be aware of it when Passover came, because they had to make unleavened bread. So they needed to make sure there was no yeast whatsoever. So it's invasive, it's pervasive, it gets into it, and you can't get it out. You have to do what? You have to throw the entire thing out and get rid of it. All their teaching is worthless because it's been corrupted by them. Just get rid of anything that they say and start over by going to the text yourself. That's partly what he is saying here. Peter declares that Jesus is the Messiah. Ooh, this is going to be fun. Notice the progression here. So let's just go back and do that a second. So we've got, and I'm not going to go all the way back. So we got the feeding of the 5,000, or we got John's beheading. We've got feeding of the 5,000. We've got a bunch of healings. We have the feeding of the 4,000. We have the demand for a sign. We have the warnings about who the Sadducees and the Pharisees are. And so they demanded a sign, and now Jesus is going to investigate where his disciples are at. So when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" Now remember, they've already worshipped him. They've already worshipped him. So this isn't a revelation in the sense of they don't think he is worthy of worship. They're not. So remember that. They replied, "Some say John the Baptist." That would be in lines with who? Herod. Herod thinks Jesus is John the Baptist. Others say Elijah. And still others, Jeremiah or one of the prophets. Well, they're hedging their bets. Well, if he's not John the Baptist and he's not Elijah, well, it was Jeremiah. He was one of the other prophets. We'll just start throwing names out there. That's good. That's good. You've heard the rumors, okay? Yep. "But what about you?" he said. "Who do you say I am?" Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." The realm of the dead. Yeah, there is a place here by Caesarea Philippi that was called the gates of Hades. So there's a real specific region, and that was considered the gate to the underworld. It won't overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. Again, with this, don't tell anyone. Why are you asking us, Jesus, to tell you who we think, and we get it right, and now you say don't tell anybody? We don't think about that point. We often go, well, what's this keys of the kingdom, and what's this binding on earth and loosing in heaven? And we get caught up in that. Yeah. Why does he want no one to know he's a Messiah? It's not his time yet. He's making sure they understand that they're following, that they're seeing things, that they know these things, so that later on, after the resurrection, they'll remember all these things. They'll be able to point to them. They'll be able to lead people to him by the things that he did while he was with them. Now, if you're wondering and you're not Catholic, it's this passage here. You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, which is why Peter is considered the first pope and the Pope of Rome, and so he is the rock on which the church is built. Peter, let's see, does it say? Yeah, Peter means rock. So there's the play on words there. And, gates of Hades, mention that. I'm not going to dive into, because there's much debate over what it means to bind on earth and loose on earth. And you get into different theological viewpoints on what that means. However, I think the point is that there's power in the name of Jesus and knowing who he is. And I think that's the point of what he's getting at here. Now Jesus predicts his death. So, okay. Peter got it right, but now let's see Peter get it wrong. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. Okay, so it's not that Jesus is only saying, hey, I'm going to go die. He also says, and I'm going to have a resurrection. He told them that the only sign that the Pharisees and the Sadducees were going to see is the sign of Jonah. Now he's explaining the sign of Jonah to his disciples. They should be going, oh my goodness, this is going to be so cool. And what happens instead? They only hear part of it. He's going to go and be killed. No. Homie, don't play that. That's Peter's response here. What you talking about, Willis? That's his response here. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I just can't imagine. And yet, I totally see it. Never, Lord, he said. This shall never happen to you. I am not going to allow them to kill you. Did you miss the second half, Peter, where he said, and raised to life? And raised to life. The third day raised to life. You missed that part, Peter. So he tells them, and he continues. Notice, this is when he began to. And it'll say this repeatedly. And he taught them what was going to happen, and they just don't grasp it. But they're afraid to ask him what he means by it. So instead, Peter just says, no. Not going to happen. Jesus turned and said, get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but mere human concerns. You know what show I used to watch? Good. That's all right. I'm glad somebody knows my references. My kids at times, when I would say things like that, wouldn't know the references and would think I made stuff up. And then suddenly, when they got older and to college, saw shows with references like that, and they're like, what? Dad didn't make that up? No, I didn't. I might be that clever, but I'm not really that clever. So he takes him aside and points out, Peter, you're thinking only humanly. You're not having your mind on the concerns of God. You just got an A in Who Am I? And an F in why am I here? That's what Peter does here. Then Jesus said to the disciples, whoever wants to be my disciples must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Okay, so a whole lot in that section, but I want you to notice where it's listed. It's listed in his correction to the disciples when Peter says he doesn't want him to go to the cross. And Jesus says, you must deny yourself and take up your cross and follow me. If you want to lose, or if you want to protect your life, you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life, you'll find it. And then it says, and what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and forfeit their soul? We often think of this as somehow being those who are trying to gain riches. No. This is to the disciples who are following him. This isn't to some unchristian person out there. This is the Christ followers. And what will anyone give in exchange for their soul? You can't. You can't. And then this phrase at the end, which I love, which I think people don't grasp. It says, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I don't think this is a thought of Jesus's return in the second coming. I think this is a looking to the resurrected body of Christ. And why does he say some will not taste death? Because remember, Judas does taste death. And this may have been more than just the 12 who were there. So there may be others who will die before Jesus goes to the cross and is resurrected. So he says some, well, the 11 do not taste death. Neither does Matthias, or who replaces Judas. And I don't remember the other one. So there's more disciples who were there, who've been following since the beginning, who aren't the chosen 12 apostles. There's more disciples. So some who are in this crowd are going to see him in resurrected. That's when Jesus comes in his kingdom, because he has conquered death and he's ushered in the kingdom of heaven. I don't think this is a reference to the second coming. If it is, well then, okay, who didn't taste death? We don't have any stories of like Elijah and a chariot of fire taking him away, or Enoch and he walked with God. No, every one of the disciples taste death. So it can't mean that, or Jesus was wrong. So it must mean something else. And I think it's the resurrection, and is what he's talking about there. So, all right, so that concludes our Matthew passage. Some pretty cool connections there. And I like the length of these sections that are coming in here, because we get such good context of the beheading of John the Baptist all the way through to Jesus declaring who he is. Because remember, John's disciples sent and asked him who he was previously. And he said, here's the signs of what are going on. And then he now does all those signs again. So, all right.